thingamabob, and there should be me. I hope you can see it.
Yes, we can see it.
And this is all the birds in the book. And this beautiful illustrator, I was so lucky to get a lovely illustrator to do it. That's the book, that's the cover. And it's all those birds, but done in a, colourful, beautiful way. Great. So what do you think? Should we get going, or do we want to wait a little bit longer?
I guess we can start. So I guess, hi everyone. We've reached the end of the term, so it's really great to see you all here. And we're really excited to welcome Charlie Corbett today, an award-winning author. And he actually very recently just published his book, 12 Birds to Save Your Life, in which he shows the joy that we can find in nature, and especially in the uncertain times that we find ourselves in. It's really important to take a step back sometimes, and I think many of us have also found ourselves reconnecting with wildlife. So it's really great to have you here today, Charlie, and thank you so much for joining us.
Well, it's a huge, huge honor. And I was just saying, I looked at the roster of former speakers, and I think I'm the only one who isn't a professor, a doctor, or a knight, or a lord. So, there's always time, I suppose. But I feel very, very humbled to be speaking to you today. It is an honor. But I suppose I don't want this to be an ordinary bird talk. I've got two aims, and when we set it up, one of them was, we talked about, you're going through exams at the moment, life is stressful, and I remember it very well from when I was at university, and I kind of wish someone had given me this talk before I was doing my finals. I tell you that for nothing. But my aim is to convince you, first off, of the need to reconnect with nature and the healing, stress-relieving qualities of nature. But also on the other side, nature needs us to reconnect too, because of course, as you will well know, whereas we used to have an abundance and a diversity of birds in particular, because that's our focus today, but all wildlife generally, we're losing a lot of this. And the reason I think we're losing this is because mankind's become dislocated. Humankind's become dislocated from its natural environment, and we need to reattach ourselves. And the other thing I want to do today is to sort of show you how to reconnect. I know you're in Oxford, so you'll be, well, are you all in Oxford? I'm very unsure with all the regulations now. I'm assuming you're back at university, but whether or not you are, I'm thinking about the Oxfordshire countryside and how you can get out, what you're likely to see there, and how to track it down in a way, or not so much track it down, how to appreciate what's already there. So those are my two aims. I think, first of all, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the book, 12 Birds to Save Your Life, Nature's Lessons in Happiness. I'm going to tell you a bit about why I wrote it and my philosophy on life, really, I suppose, because I think I come at it from a slightly different angle to most people who go bird watching. And then after I've done that, I'm going to go through some of them. We'll probably not have time to go through all the birds I've talked about, but to go through some of these birds that you are likely to see all around you, whether it be in the Oxfordshire countryside or anywhere in England and Wales and Scotland. I want to tell you a bit about its context, where you're going to see it, how to see it, what it sounds like. They're all gateway birds, my 12 birds. They're up here. So the song thrush, for example, is a gateway bird to other thrushes like blackbirds and missel thrushes and fieldfares, all the different types of thrush. So I don't know how much also what your knowledge is like at the moment. You may know all this. I may be preaching to the converted. You may be rolling your eyes and saying, I know all this already. But that, and the other thing I want to do is to sort of maybe find a bit of, talk a little bit about its place in our culture. Because humankind's been our ancestors were more attached to their natural environments. It was a coping mechanism for them. I think they understood death and change much more than we did, and the reason they do that is they understand it more is because they moved with the rhythms and the seasons. They knew they could look out of their windows or walk down the lane, and they knew where the sparrows were nesting, and they knew when the chiff-chaff would arrive, and the power that hearing that song in March has over the soul, I would say. So that's my plan. And And I say usually the form is that people ask questions at the end, but if you suddenly feel the urge to shout out a question, please don't hold back. But if you want to wait to the end, that's also cool too. It's all very relaxed. You probably guess I'm quite relaxed sort of a person. So let's start off with why I wrote the book. So I want to be very clear before I start this talk on birds and their power to instruct us and to heal, that I'm not an ornithologist, okay? I'm not a twitcher, I'm not a birder, I'm just an ordinary person who's beset by the same stresses, anxieties, and inexplicable melancholy as anyone else, and who not so long ago was completely oblivious to all the birds around me. I knew nothing. And I was also oblivious to the damage that this ignorance of nature had done to my resilience in the face of what life threw at me. And the reason, sadly, I feel the need to point this out is because more often than not, when I mention to someone, a friend or family, my love for the birds and their power to heal, something indiscernible changes in their manner towards me. A barely perceptible glaze comes across their eyes and they'll say something like, "Oh, you're a twitcher." And I know that I've just been put in the same category as a sort of train spotter or obsessive hobbyist, and harmless, but just a wee bit dull. And I ask myself every time, why is it that something so fundamental to our life on planet Earth, the birds and the landscape they inhabit, something that was for our ancestors innate and so profoundly healing, is too often treated as a specialist hobby for the nice but a bit dull? I can't get my head around it, and I get this reaction from so many people. Probably not from you guys, I'm sure, because I hope I'm preaching to the converted a little bit. But as a species, what I said before, we've become disconnected from our natural environment. We've locked the birds out of our lives, as I had too at one point. And we don't even realize the damage this has done, both to ourselves and our ability to cope with what fate chucks at us, but also to the wildlife around us, which is struggling more now than it ever has done. And I think that too often we think about nature and wildlife, or people do, in the abstract. We talk grandly about climate change or the loss of the Amazonian rainforests, which are profoundly important. But what we don't do is connect into the stuff that's outside our door, the sparrows outside our door, which, the populations of sparrows have fallen by 70%. 10, 15 years ago in London and in Oxford, you would have seen great clouds of sparrows everywhere. And they're disappearing, and we need to get to the bottom of why. And I think that the more you fall in love with the birds outside your door, and the more you do at home, conservation, I always think, starts at home. It starts outside your front door. So I'm quite passionate about that. Wonderfully, the happy irony of these lockdowns that we've been going through, which have been horrific and awful in one way, they seem to have unlocked a widespread desire for people to get to know more about the wildlife. And I think that's because A, they're not going away on holidays, and B, at the very beginning, I think you'll remember the first lockdown, it was total silence. There were no planes in the air, the cars stopped running, and suddenly people could hear this cacophony of birdsong. And firstly, they found it, nature does stuff to you that you don't realize it's doing it to you, and it was making them happy just to hear it, and they didn't know why, and they want to know more. I was lucky because I had this idea for this book 8 years ago, and the reason it got published now is because I think this widespread desire to know more. It's why I'm standing talking to you here right now, I'm sure. What am I then if I'm not a bird or a twitcher? Why do I know so much? Well, about the birds. And I don't, by the way, I'm not an author, so I don't know everything. I really don't. I know about the stuff around me. And that's, I'm a normal person who, one day in my mid-30s, I've been living abroad. I'd been working in Australia as a journalist. I'm a financial journalist by trade, actually. I had spent 3 years in Sydney writing for a magazine. I then had traveled all around Africa for the Financial Times. And I came back to the village where I was born, the farm I was born on, and I looked into the hedgerows and I listened in the tree, listened to the sounds coming out of the trees one glorious May day. And I thought, I don't know any of this. I've forgotten anything I did know. I've completely forgotten. And I felt totally dislocated from my natural environment. And I wanted to do something about it. So once I made that decision to reconnect with nature, and again, it doesn't have to be, you know, I think that's why it's, you know, you've got exams coming up, and I think it's really, this is why I think this is hopefully will really help. Once you've made the decision to reconnect with nature, you know, I found personally very rapidly, and to my everlasting delight, that this simple act, this sort of personal bird-based renaissance, provided me with the best coping mechanism for stress, anxiety, and uncertainty I've ever known. It's like nature is an inbuilt coping mechanism for us. We are of this planet. We're not just in it. You know, we've lived since the Industrial Revolution. I mean, of course, things are changing now, and that's why we have climate change. Why everything's going wrong is because humankind sought to conquer nature. Everyone had to be conquered, didn't it? We had to build bridges and huge reservoirs, and we had to push nature back. And now we've realized, we've woken up, hopefully not too late, to this idea that actually we should live alongside nature, and nature work with nature. And then once you do that, you'll find that nature will help you every day because we are of it. You know, and as I was saying, stress and anxiety it helps with, and in particular, you know, during a really difficult time for me when my mum, who was in her early 60s, was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And actually, the book is 12 birds over 12 months. And it's that 12-month period of my life where my mum was diagnosed, and the aftermath, and how I fell apart a bit, span off into the cosmos, and how these birds that I'm talking about today helped to sort of bring me back from the brink in a way. They didn't cure cancer, they didn't solve my problems, but what they did was they gave me real perspective on my life, which I'll talk about a bit more. You know, they bind me, these birds bind me to my own environment, and they ground me in place and in season in a way that no smartphone app or therapist possibly could. You know, and they make me realize, as I always say, look, I'm not the lead role in my own private melodrama. I am merely a bit part in nature's great epic. And it's very reassuring to know that. You know, they help me every single day, not just in the difficult times. You know, take my life in Wiltshire. You know, I'm going through a very stressful time at the moment. I'm promoting the book and doing lots of talks and interview stuff that quite frankly terrifies me. But the best stress reliever and distraction are the birds in my garden. The blackbirds nesting in the hedges, the 2 collared dove chicks I've got in the yew tree that are just fledging now, the missel thrush nesting somewhere in the next door field. You know, I'll walk down the canal and listen to the reed warblers and the sedge warblers that have just arrived from Africa, and see the house martins swooping. They've just come from Africa too, swooping and dancing in the air with such joy. Or go up on the hill behind my house and listen to the skylarks. I mean, more on all these birds later. But listening to those skylarks, you know, it does something to you. Nature, as I say, does stuff to you that you don't realize it's doing it. And so my point is, you know, once you tune in, what I want to help you to do today is really to tune in, because it's quite difficult to tune in. You know, learning birdsong is hard. I always compare it to a kind of Hilary Mantel novel, you know, 1,000 pages. I'll have retired by the time I finish this book, you think to yourself. You know, my children will be grown up. But actually, once you skip through the first 3 chapters, it becomes an increasing delight. And that's what learning birdsong is, and learning about the birds is. I am still learning every day I go out into the fields and I learn something new. Nature either teaches me something, or I'll see a new butterfly I didn't know before, and I'll find out what it was, and then look forward to seeing it next time. So it's this wonderful distraction. So what I'm going to start with, when I tried to reconnect, my biggest problem was that now, of course, we've got lots of apps, which is absolutely wonderful. But when I was reconnecting, there wasn't. So I'd just hear a bird sing in a hedge, and I'd say, well, how on earth? Or see a little brown job. They're called all birders, called small brown birds, small brown jobs they're called, because they're just these, you know, every bird looks the same. in a field, let's say. But I'd have to go to the guidebook and try to identify it, or it was just very, very hard. What I needed was context. What I needed was someone to say to me, if you are in farmland, if you're on an open hill, this is what you're likely to see. So I'll start running through these birds with farmland birds. And my favorite farmland bird is the skylark. And I'll tell you a bit about the skylark. So I'm going to move my head. It was behind my head. I didn't know how to point to it. Anyway, there we go. Skylarks, bottom right-hand corner of the picture. I'm afraid I'm technologically backward. I'm over 40, so I know nothing about technology. But the skylark, when you're out in the field, so when you finish this talk, or when you're stressed about your exams, find a big open space in the Oxfordshire countryside or any countryside around your home that's farmland. And this time of year is perfect. Go out in the morning, it's the best time to see birds. Best time to see birds and hear them is the morning and the evening. I love the evening because in the morning, you don't really want to get up at 5 a.m. for the dawn chorus. It's a bit much when you've got a lot of exams on. Go out in the evening. This time of year, 7 p.m., something like that. I was doing it last night on Wimbledon Common, listening to the song thrushes. And if you were in an open field, you'll hear this sort of soaring, tinkling, joyous sound. And skylarks are the only birds that sing on the wing. So they hover sort of sometimes up to 100 feet in the air, and they just hover perfectly still, just singing this glorious song. And it's a tinkling, cascading noise. I will play it for you. I didn't want it to be one of those boring, nerdy bird chats, but I'm going to play you the skylark, because you'll have heard this before, but you might not have known it was a skylark. So whenever you're in an open field, this is, and there are skylarks, this is what you'll hear. You may not be able to hear it. And could you hear that? Did you hear that? Oh, you could hear it. Good. Yeah, the technology worked. So that noise, that's what I heard. So the example I use in the book about the skylark is that, we just had mum's terminal cancer diagnosis, and I was living in the Pewsey Vale in a little cottage, and no one trains you for bad news. You don't know how to react. You're numb, actually. This isn't the point where I find personally you were crying or anything like that. You don't know what to think. And so I was finding myself not knowing what to think or do. So I just went for a walk in the August drizzle and, trying very hard not to think about anything at all, really, because I slightly was, fearful of the thoughts that would come. So I found myself lying on the side of a hill, and I heard that noise. And while at the time I'd been trying to reconnect with nature in a kind of tick boxing way, this was the first time that I really felt something stir inside me, and it gave me on a very difficult day. Yes, it didn't cure cancer, it didn't take my problems away, but what it did was, for those moments, take me to a better place. It was a sound resonant of my childhood when I used to work in the barley fields, picking oats out of the barley for my dad. But it just took me away from myself for just a brief moment, and it pinned me down in a way when I was spinning off into goodness knows where. And I couldn't remember the last time I just sat in a field on my own and listened to a bird sing. And it's something very healing and special about that. That was my personal experience with the skylark, and I write about it obviously in more detail in the book. And of course, if you are in farmland, you will also see, these are the other birds you are likely to see. You'll see things like yellowhammers. Yellowhammer is the most glorious bird. They're actually a type of bunting. I just love the name. I love the names for our birds: larks, buntings, pipits, the peewits. They're such wonderful, glorious names. Our ancestors came up for these birds, and those lovely collective nouns, an exaltation of skylarks. Well, of course it's called an exaltation, because that's how you feel. The yellowhammer is a golden brown, beautiful, rich golden brown bird. It's like someone's covered. It's like sticky toffee pudding in custard if it was a pudding, And they're a farmland bird, and that you'll see them whizzing all up and down the hedgerows when you're out in the farmland, while the skylarks are above you flapping their wings. And a skylark is a small, you can see it there. They're a sort of thrush-sized bird. They're not huge. And they often sit on fence posts and look at you. And you'll also see things like, if you're in lucky, and those things like corn buntings as well. But again, when you're out, the one you really need to listen out for, I think, is the skylark. And you know that everything else will come. You know, when you're in a field, you'll probably see a hare sliding across the landscape. I love hares. They've got this sort of ancient, mystical feel about them. I always think the difference between a hare and a rabbit is the difference between a sort of Ford car and a Bentley. You know, a hare is the Bentley of wildlife, just sliding across its landscape. Just in the evening, you'll see hares. They only really come out at dawn and dusk, hares. And if you go out at dusk and listen to your skylark, you might well see a hare too. And suddenly you're completely enwrapped by your environment. You've suddenly become of it and with it. And all your worries and exam stresses, just for those moments, they'll go away somewhere else. And it's like you filled yourself up with this sort of magic tincture, just for those moments. And it gives you strength, it gives you mental ballast. And also those sorts of times are when you have your best ideas, you know, when you've cleared your brain. You know, I'm not a Buddhist and I don't meditate or anything, but it is a form of meditation. I mean, that's what it is. And people say, go off and meditate, clear your head. Have you ever tried that? It's impossible. I can't clear my head. I've got a million thoughts going on at once. What you need to clear your head, I think, is to get out and commune with nature. And I say the word commune with nature, immediately people say, oh yeah, I'm not a hippie. I mean, look at me, I'm not a hippie. That's what I'd say. In terms of its impact on our life, the skylark, you know, one of my favorite descriptions of the lark song is from Shakespeare, which is, like to the lark at the break of day arising from sullen earth, sings hymns at heaven's gate. And that's what they're doing, hovering up there, singing hymns at heaven's gate. And in terms of music, because we've been obsessed by these birds for thousands of years. It's only in the last couple of generations we've kind of forgotten about them. Our ancestors, people used to, I mean, this is awful. People used to eat larks' tongues because they thought that would make them better public speakers in the 16th century. Dreadful, dreadful thing, but there were a lot of larks then. But Vaughan Williams wrote a bit of music called The Lark Ascending, which I'm sure you've heard, but I sometimes just sit and listen to it on a wet and windy afternoon, and it takes me to different places. It can never obviously match the lark in terms of its beauty, because I don't think man or woman, humankind can imitate nature. I mean, I think we can do our best, but I think that we can never quite get there. So that's the, how long have I been wittering on? That's the farmland birds. You're also going to see, I mean, some of my 12 birds, some are not. So we've talked about yellowhammers and corn, but meadow pipits are lovely things. They sort of pop up off out of the ground, sort of with a cheep cheep. I can't do it, you know, noise, and they're beautiful. They're a bird of the open field. And of course, kestrels. I love a kestrel. Kestrel is the only bird of prey that hovers. So you've got hovering skylarks singing. They're the only ones that sing on the wing, and then these beautiful birds of prey, these small brown and black birds of prey hovering over their prey, like just sort of like that. Amazing, just amazing to watch, and then dive down on a mouse or a vole or something like that. So that's what you'll also see when you're out and about. So to finish up on the skylark, more poetry, and then I'll move to sort of garden birds and what you're going to see in the garden. So I like this from Percy Shelley. Hail to thee, blithe spirit, bird thou never wert, that from heaven or near it pourest thy full heart in profuse strains of unpremeditated art. I love that, unpremeditated art. I think that's a wonderful expression. I mean, while I'm not sorry, that's my phone. While I'm not, you know, an English scholar, and I, as soon as I see, you know, some of the romantic poems, you know, I think, oh, well, that's far too long, I'll never get through it. Sometimes they hit the nail on their head, and that's what Shelley's done just then, I think. So that's the lark. First thing you do when you get out in the field, listen out for the lark. The next bird I want to talk about, garden birds more generally. Do shout if you've got any questions now, but yeah, we can do the questions at the end, make a note of them. The other song that bird I think that if you're going to make a short list of ones to listen out for and learn about is the song thrush. I love the song thrush more than most other. I just words fail me. Now the thrush is song thrush is a type of thrush like a blackbird. Blackbird probably wins in terms of the beauty of its song. Blackbird's song you'll hear everywhere. If I open my window now, even in Wimbledon, in London, I will hear a blackbird singing within a few minutes. It's such a glorious noise, and it goes straight to your soul. But the reason I love the song thrush is because it's one of the only birds that sings in winter. And so it starts singing in sort of December or January. And, those depressing Januaries when, the fun of Christmas is all over. You've got massive credit card bill, probably got some exams or a dissertation to finish of your university. It's not a happy time of year, let's face it. And there was a time in my life shortly after my mum died where I was in my little cottage, couldn't sleep. I think my wife Mary was away abroad for work or something before we had children, couldn't sleep, tossing and turning, 1,000 thoughts a minute. You know what it's like. And it was probably 5 a.m, something like that, still pitch dark, and up sings this song thrush, and it's a loud and persistent noise. And I'll play it to you now. And you'll probably think, golly, if I heard that at 5 a.m, I'd lob a brick at it because I want to get back to sleep. But but I didn't. I'll tell you why. Here's the song thrush. Right. That sort of died. Can you still hear me? So the song thrush it's loud, persistent. So Gerald Manley Hopkins said it strikes like lightnings when a song thrush sings, and it's true. And there it was, striking like lightning outside my window. And again, part of you wants to lob a brick at it. And then I thought, well, I've got so much to do today. And then I thought, well, no, I'm not going to. I'm going to sit and I'm going to wallow in that song and I'm going to listen to it because, that thrush in the middle of winter is giving us a message. It's sending us a message that winter will end, that spring is on its way, and whether you like it or not, the season will turn, your life will turn. It's a living, singing metaphor. It's an important bird, the song thrush. And the joy is there everywhere, all around us. We've got far fewer than we used to, like with all the birds I'm talking about today. But I could walk out. Last night, I got up here late after an enormous blooming traffic jam from Wiltshire. I love Wiltshire. I don't like leaving it anymore. I got to London, sort of got to my hotel. And you know what hotels are like. They're not sort of too sort of warm and embracing. It's just not home, really. And luckily, I went for a walk on the common and I just sat and listened to a song thrush sing, just like you heard then. And it just gives me a moment of peace and distraction and puts my life into perspective. Again, this idea that, I'm just my problems, that thrush will be singing in 100 years, or not that one, but another thrush will be singing in 100 years when all my problems have disappeared off into the cosmos, and we are just, it does put your life into perspective. And the bit of poetry that I use in the book about the song thrush, which I love, is from Thomas Hardy, the darkling thrush, that I could think there trembled through his happy goodnight air some blessed hope whereof he knew and I was unaware. And that's exactly, I remember reading that and thinking, that's what I felt. It takes Thomas Hardy to tell me, but that's what I felt when I heard the song thrush sing. So you've got the lark in the farmland and the song thrush around the gardens, and you get them everywhere, mainly in suburbs, London parks, villages and towns. They're everywhere. They're fine featured. So the song thrush is the top left of my chart at the back. It's got this beautiful, creamy, freckled breast, and it's got a cousin called the missel thrush that's slightly bigger and meatier bird, like your sort of tough elder cousin who's into contact sports, and it's a bit grayer. But the missel thrush is great too because it also sings in winter, but it also sings all through the storms. They're great metaphors. It's a missel thrush is the only bird that will sing in the middle of a blooming lightning storm. The missel thrush will still sing, and it sounds a cross between, if you don't know, you don't know, but it's a cross between a song thrush and a blackbird. Really, they're quite hard to tell which is which when they sing, but they used to be called the stormcock by our ancestors because that's when they used to sing. And they're called a mistle thrush because they like mistletoe, which is fairly basic. But so those are the thrushes. And obviously the blackbirds, blackbirds are just sheer heaven, and they start to sing. Blackbirds start to sing in February. And hearing that blackbird sing it on a cold February day is like, warm honey infused porridge to my soul, I have to say. And it's such a lovely noise. So those are the thrushes. Other garden birds. So when you're going to see thrushes, what you'll see, of course, are robins. I mean, it's a national bird of Britain, the robin. But what I love about robins is that you can be digging the garden or sitting on a bench in a park, or a robin will find you. And it happened to me at a dark time in my life when mum was in hospital and I was going out into this sort of horrible little car park near Southampton Hospital to go and sort of try and, I don't know, escape it all for a bit. And this robin kept finding me, and I kept seeing this robin, and it taught me that actually, we think about nature, we must rush out and find it. It's all part of this conquering thing. I'm going to go and find a Dartford warbler. I'm going to go up to some estuary and find something rare. No, my answer is not in that. My answer is in sitting where you are, sitting still, and the best advice I ever had was let nature come to you. Find an old oak tree somewhere. Oaks have 2,000, this better than I do, 2,000 species that live in an oak. And just lie down on a summer afternoon, or evening is always the best time. Sometimes I take a beer and I just sit there, and, nature will find you. The birds will start landing the trees around you. You might see some rabbits or some hares, or a robin will certainly come and see what you're up to because they're fiercely competitive. They're probably the most competitive of birds. So they're always fighting, and they're very proprietorial, as are blackbirds actually, over, they get quite furious with you, but they also just sit and watch. And you can get robins into your hand. You can feed robins out of your hands. They're quite remarkable, and they nest everywhere. They nest in our sheds. They even nested on someone's bed once, and the owner of that bed allowed the robin to carry on nesting on his bed and slept somewhere else, which I admire hugely. And that's the robin, such a cultural part of our cultural heritage. Obviously, that's why they're called robin redbreasts, because of the postman. I'm sure you know this. In the 1840s, when they invented Christmas cards, the Victorians invented Christmas cards in the 1840s. I did a history degree, and they all wore red waistcoats, and robins were associated with Christmas. So everybody put robins on Christmas cards, and they were delivered by these people in red waistcoats, and so they were called robin redbreasts. So there's a little bit of it, the robin in our culture. But all these birds every bird has a place in our culture. It has stories that go back thousands of years of how we let's see how we're doing for time. Not too bad. Of how we interact with these creatures. Our ancestors interacted with these creatures and cared so much for them. So you'll also see, of course, robins. That's where you see, if you put your garden bird feeder out, always put them out in winter. Don't put them out in spring or summer, really, because they can spread disease and disrupt nesting patterns. The best time to put a garden feeder out is kind of what's called the hunger gap: November, December, January, February, when there's no more food in the hedgerows, and all the arable fields have got no more gleanings of corn left over or anything, and they really are hungry. That's when most of them die. I mean, you can up to 25% of all wrens can die in a winter. So the best time to put your feeders out is then, and you'll get, if you put out some nuts and stuff, fat balls and those sorts of things. I used to think feeders were the preserve of, old ladies and lonely bachelors. And I thought I was a bit, oh, really? But my Lord, I've never looked back. You just put them out, and you can get them right next to your house, and you are seeing nature in action, and you will get blue tits. And the full name for blue tits is blue titmice. They're called titmice. So you get blue tits, great tits, long-tailed tits, which are nice, beautiful, tiny little fluffy creatures, and obviously all the finches, like green finches and chaffinches, and then you'll get them all. What amazed me when I first started doing this is the sheer diversity of bird life we have still in this country. I counted up, I mean, it's 12 birds to save your life, but I counted up how many birds I'd mentioned in my book. It was something like 85. You'll get 20 different species feeding at your feeder. I mean, it's amazing to watch the different hierarchies of these birds. So put out feeders in the winter. I mean, go online, see how to do it properly, because you've got to wash them, and you've got to make them squirrel proof as well. Otherwise, the grey squirrels will just take it all and break the feeder. So you need to make them squirrel proof, and try and keep the bigger birds out, the magpies and the other what are known as corvids, the crows and everything, because they will try and get in, and they just put off all the smaller birds, and they also raid their nests. And sparrows, of course, you're going to hopefully get clouds of these beautiful sparrows chirping and chuckling and squabbling all around, and it's just life affirming to watch. That's the garden birds. The ones that stand out in my book, as I say, are the song thrush. Please go out and listen to one of those or tune into those. Obviously, the robins, wrens as well have the most tiny little birds. Wrens, the little cocked tails, like someone's put the tail on the wrong way in the factory. And they're tough wrens. They're tiny, smaller than a golf ball, weigh an ounce, half an ounce, and they've got the loudest song. You'll hear a wren trill, and it is the most amazing song, and they're everywhere. There are millions, more wrens, I think, in this country than any other bird. People think they're mice because when you walk down a lane, you just see this sort of brown sort of flash go underneath your feet, and it's not a mouse, it's a wren. They nest and in winter, because wrens are so small, a lot of them die in winter. What they'll do is they'll all get together. They put all their territorial disputes behind them. And I mentioned this in the book. They'll find a tiny space, like a crack in a wall, and you'll get 10 wrens just spending the winter in this tiny crack. I can remember seeing on my wall at home sort of 5 or 6 wrens coming out of the smallest, tiniest crack in the wall I'd ever seen. And I sort of did my research, and I found that in Norfolk in the 60s, they found something like 100 wrens in a tiny little post box, all snuggled up together. So always in winter, look out for these little hideaways where you might just suddenly come across 10 wrens. But that's the wren. So these are the garden birds. I again talk about them in the book. I want to move on probably lastly, because we're running out of time, and I hope you've got questions. Are the spring and summer migrants. People get very confused over migrants, and one of the reasons way back in 2014, when I first was inspired to write this book, it was because my darling wife Mary, we were driving back from the railway station or something, and she said something like, "Don't all songbirds migrate from Africa every year?" And I thought, okay, wow, she grew up in North Yorkshire, and her dad was a real countryman, and I thought, okay, that's interesting. If Mary doesn't know, then nobody knows. So I need to write this down in a way that everyone understands and knows. That no, not all songbirds migrate, but some do, obviously. Now, we all know about the house martins, the swallows, and the swifts. Now, they come every year and are just, again, the miracle of coming forth. We've put men on the moon. We've got phones that tell us what we want for lunch next Thursday. We live in this high-tech age, and yet nobody really knows where the house martins go to each winter. That blows my mind. And the fact that they come 4,000 miles to the very same place they were born every year blows my mind. And nobody really knows how. I love that. It's called a miracle. It's an overused word, miracle, but it is a miracle. And it happens every year, and it ends up in your barn, in your village. And the other migrants, and the one I talk about in the book, is one you may not have heard of. I mean, again, I don't know your level of knowledge, but I'm going to witter on anyway, is the chiffchaff. The chiffchaff is a tiny olive green warbler. So these warblers all come from Africa every year, and they're all indistinct olive, grey, brown, green things. And it's very hard to tell them apart. But it's the sound is what you want to listen for. They sing beautifully. But the chiffchaff is the herald of spring. It comes a month before the cuckoo, and it comes in those dank March days when, the spirit that denies, you think spring is coming, but it won't. Like this year, it never came. It was cold, wintry. It was March coming into April. There's no spring yet. But the chiffchaff is the first bird, first warbler to arrive from Africa, and it's got an onomatopoeic call. So it actually calls chiff chaff, chiff chaff, chiff chaff, chiff chaff if you go outside now into the countryside, they're not really a town bird, they're a countryside. They love oak trees. They flit around the top of oak trees. Weighs half an ounce, the chiffchaff, and it's come all the way from 4,000 miles again from Africa, and it starts singing that song in an English country lane or wherever you might be, and it is heaven to hear. And what that song is saying, rather like the song thrush in winter, is, I know you think it's spring and summer's never going to come because of this bitterly cold wind, you know, and I know, you know, and the daffodils are fooling you, but actually what this chiffchaff is saying is spring is coming. I'm here to prove spring is coming. And, you know, I always think when I hear a chiffchaff sing, how many countless generations of people going back thousands of years heard that noise and felt spiritually refreshed by it, you know, were given hope. Because, you know, in the old days, winter, everyone died, didn't they? It's like we're going through a coronavirus now. This basically happened every winter from up to the 18th century, up until vaccinations. You know, a huge amount of people would die, whether it be smallpox or, you know, it was awful time, winter, and spring coming, and that chiffchaff telling you that spring coming was such an important helpmeet and for people, and it still is. So the chiffchaff is one of, if I want you to take away one bird, you know, I'm going to recap at the end. You know, listen out for the chiffchaff now. It'll sing till September. Birds stop singing completely in August because their feathers fall out. It's called the molt, and they grow a new set. So they go and hide, and they don't sing at all. And then they sing a little bit more in September, and then the warblers all head back to Africa. But other warblers, you know, I talked before about the reed warblers and sedge warblers next to rivers. You've got blackcaps, nightingale, obviously, down in southeast England. They sing late in the evening and into the night. So yeah, those, listen out for the warblers. They go back in September. And then, of course, at September time, when all the summer, you know, when the swifts, the swallows, and the house martins, and all those warblers are heading back to Africa, and the turtle doves, sadly, we haven't really got any turtle doves left. You get, you know, they're flycatchers as well. They migrate, but focus on the warblers. What we then get are the winter migrants. So what happens in winter, they've just left, and then we get this whole load of birds down from Scandinavia and Russia and places like that come and spend their winters in a nice warm place, which is here. So you get things like fieldfares and redwings to look out for in winter time, which is a type of thrush. They're like big, slightly bigger. Well, the fieldfare is slightly bigger than a song thrush, but and white, black, and brown. But my point is, then you get this great, you know, a lot of different types of duck and waders, like the curlews all fly down from the hills and spend the winter down in the estuaries. And curlew, I want to talk about the curlew really a little bit, because it is the most, anytime you've watched, you know, Wuthering Heights or any movie set on a moor or a ghost story or whatever it might be, you have heard the song of the curlew, which I will play now, because it's such a haunting, beautiful song that this is one I do search out because it's such a lovely song. Listen to this. So it probably doesn't translate well on Zoom, let's face it. But if you're out in a field or on the hills, the curlews do their nesting up high on the hills in the spring and summer, and they'll be making that cool. Places whether you still have strong populations are in kind of Yorkshire on the moors. You won't hear one in Oxfordshire. You may do if you're lucky. But the west coast of Scotland, where I always used to go on our holidays, and listening to the curlews is, you know, resonant for me of very happy childhood days. And in fact, one of my favourite descriptions of it comes from a fella called Edward Grey. Sir Edward Grey was British Foreign Secretary at the outbreak of the First World War, but he was also a keen ornithologist. Wrote a beautiful book called The Charm of Birds in the 1920s when he'd retired, and he said of the curlew, on a still day, one can almost feel the air vibrating with the blessed sound. The notes do not sound passionate. They suggest peace, rest, healing joy, and assurance of happiness past, present, and to come. To listen to curlews on a bright, clear April day with the fullness of spring still in anticipation is one of the best experiences that a lover of birds can have. And I love that, because this is a guy who I have nothing in common with, who lived 100 years ago, who wrote that, and I'm connected right into that. I see it. And that's the power of, that is the power of birds. And they still have it, and they'll still have it in 100 years' time. So we've got 10 minutes left. And what I'll do is finish up by saying and I hope you've got some questions. If not, don't worry at all. The ones to look out for, just to make life easier. And I know some of you might have known all this before. But the ones I would look out for right now in terms of what's going to be in your garden or around the Oxfordshire fields, please listen out for the skylark. Number one, please listen out for the skylark. Focus on listening out for that one. I would also say the song thrush and the blackbird. It's really hard to tell the difference in those two. But there's loads of apps. There's a brilliant app called BirdNet. Download it and you just play it, and it'll tell you exactly what's singing in the background. It's a work of genius. Wish I'd had it when I was learning. I think the wren is a great one to listen out for as well, because there's so many wrens. You're going to hear a wren all the time. So look it up on the internet. The RSPB has a very good website, which I've just been using to play those sounds. So look at that. And of course, if you're in the countryside, do listen out for the dear old chiffchaff. So those are the ones I would say: wren, song thrush, blackbird, chiffchaff, skylark. Keep it to 5. Don't try and do everything. Just listen out for those. And actually, what you'll then start doing, and that's the glory of when you start doing this, you'll start noticing all the other ones. So actually, those are sparrows. Oh, and look at those swallows in the sky, or those house martins, and you'll gradually get yourself into it. But maybe focus on those 5 when you're saying, right, this is what I'm going to do. Stressed out with exams on Tuesday night. I know I've got exam on Wednesday morning. They still 3 hours. God, 3 hours. I'm going to go out and walk. Find a restful spot, take the bus out, or get on a bicycle, go up onto the hill, and eve sort of dusk, 7ish, 6:37, up to 8 o'clock. I'm just going to walk on my own or with a friend. Not too many people, and sit and listen, watch. We see, but we don't watch, and we hear, but we don't listen. And try and do a bit of watching and listening. And you know what? You'll I hope you'll thank me. Anyway, that is the end of my rambling talk. Do say if you've got any questions, do please ask.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was such a lovely talk. So if anybody has questions, you can just unmute yourself or write them in the chat. I guess I've got a question. I think it's really hard for me to distinguish the different bird songs. So have you got any tips of how, I guess, you could get into that and get better at identifying bird songs?
Well, first tip is, it's a bit late now for this, but next year, is the best way to really learn a bird singing is to see it singing. So if in early spring, before the leaf is on the tree, you go out with your binoculars, or just go out and you hear a bird sing, you can actually see it in the trees singing. And it's amazing how helpful that is once your brain has made the link. So that's one way. The other way, I do recommend this BirdNet thing. But the other thing I would say is do what I've just told you then, which is just try and get 5 down pat. See, because once let's say the chaffinch, the robin, common ones, the robin, the chaffinch, the blackbird, then you start knowing what it's not. I hear something that's not a chaffinch, it's not a blackbird, it's not. So actually, I'm in my garden. What's the context of this? It might well be a greenfinch churring away. So as I said before, it's context. When I actually read my book, you'll know which birds you're likely to see. So when I still get confused. So I was up in a field the other day, and open field, listening to the skylarks, so as is my wont, and I heard this noise I'd never heard. I thought it was always a linnet. I wasn't sure. And then of course, so what else am I likely to see out here? Well, probably corn bunting. So then it was a corn bunting. So it's kind of, once you've got your context, it's much easier. And of course, the time of year, if it's summer, it's going to be if it's a beautiful, it's a blackcap, which I heard singing outside just now. that's a migratory warbler. So, and the warblers all have the same sort of warbling sound, like they're having a very long conversation like this. And then you can sort of gradually your ear, and the more you do it, what you learn is your ear tunes in. So you know that the smaller birds have a more high-pitched noise and the bigger birds have a more melodic, fluty, like a blackbird is more melodic and fluty like a thrush, whereas a long-tailed tit or something tiny one will just go seep, 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 so you'll know that I know that sounds mad, never do impersonations of birds. It doesn't work, it puts people off. But but it is a layering effect, and and also take joy in it too. So that would be my advice. Probably not very helpful. So yeah, no, do I know it's always difficult with questions. I never used to ask questions in these talks. But do shout. If not, then
we actually have a question in the chat. Okay. So Lucy asked, how difficult was it to choose just 12 birds to focus on? Were there any difficult decisions over other contenders?
The answer is yes, it was a complete nightmare. And it was very difficult. What narrowed it down was I really thought hard about that 12-month period of my life and what birds really stood out for me. But I also tried to, and the way to shoehorn I managed to shoehorn most of the ones I wanted in, because as I said before, they're gateway birds. So if I'm talking about the thrush, it was a nightmare. The song thrush and the blackbird is so hard because they're such beautiful songs, such lovely birds. And so, but I felt, if you talk about thrushes, I can then talk about all the thrushes, or talk about the chiffchaff. I can also talk about the black-capped warbler, which is my favorite kind of warbler, probably above the chiffchaff in a way. So yes, it was an absolute nightmare, and it took a while, but I hope I got there in the end. Thanks, Lucy.
I guess I have another question. So I think in difficult times, people tend to look for things to ground themselves, whether it's music or art. But I was just wondering what makes nature so grounding, as you mentioned in your talk. How is songbird, for example, different from music that we play at home or listen to?
I think it's similar, but it's the same but different in a way. Whatever is good for you. But I mean, music, of course, that reaches into your soul too. It's, for me, the reason I wrote the book is it's a coping mechanism that has been ignored in a way that music hasn't. I don't think people realize, and also nature does stuff to you that you don't realize it's doing to you. The coming of spring, little switches are going off inside you don't know are happening, but it is happening, and we've ignored it. It's so weird how we've cut this half of our lives, cut ourselves off from this part of our lives, this inbuilt coping mechanism. So I think it's the same but different to music and those other ways. And if I even, someone who loves music, I say, well, perfect. Turn off the music, go out onto the hill and just lie and listen and watch. And then that's just another way, isn't it? And that's why it's life-saving, because it takes you away from yourself. It takes you away from your thoughts. Anything that can do that has immense power. So the same but different.
Oh, and also, I guess, how often do you go outside and listen to birds, or how do you schedule the time? And I'm guessing you have quite a busy life now, but
yeah, I'm busy. So it's 2 children under 6. It's harder than ever before, and it's hard. But actually, it's relative. It's hard for everybody. You're busy with exams. People have got massively stressful jobs. Shoehorning an hour into your day, you just have to force yourself to do it. You have to force yourself to do it. But also the other thing is, I can just walk down the street now. I'm going to walk across this common to a tent over there in a minute, and I know that I'm going to see some I can see the nice starlings. Might hear a blackcap sing. I'm doing it all the time. I don't have to shoehorn time, so I can go because I'm tuned in. I'm constantly aware. It's amazing. It's like for your brain. The human brain is amazing. It's so once you're tuned in, it will notice everything. It is quite remarkable. And it'll only take you a year or so to tune in, and then it's just a layering effect. It would take a month, but it's such a joy, and it's a layering effect. So while I try once a day to get an hour out, and go for a walk and look and listen and watch, but if I can't, I'm always aware. Is the answer to that.
We've actually got another question in the chat from Eleanor. This was such an amazing talk. Thank you. My question is, a lot of the times when you're walking in the countryside, the birds fly away because they're scared. Are there tips to not scare them during a walk, or is it just about sitting somewhere and waiting for them to come to you?
I think you're right. You've hit the nail on the head. It is about the waiting, but then not all birds will fly away. So generally in the country, what you'll find, they will fly away, but they'll never fly far away. That's the other thing. So they'll always do what they tend to do is fly a few feet ahead of you. They're wary, and they have alarm calls and things, and they'll bodge down the hedge just ahead of you quite a lot of the time. So they're still with you and still around. But the best way, if you really want to identify, I say early spring's great. But the best time is to, and I say I'm not a birder. I don't recommend going down to a huge estuary and sitting in a hut at 5 in the morning. What I mean is just sitting. Once you sit on that evening stroll or sit down on a bench and look around and listen, then they very easily come to, they just get on with their lives around you. That's what they do. They just get on with their lives, birds. That's the other thing about it. Sparrows just get on with that. We spend our life thinking all the time, overthinking everything, because we've got these massive brains that we've sort of over-evolved. And I look at sparrows and I just see them just getting on with their lives. Why can't I? There's a philosopher called Alan Watts, who was in the 60s, and he had this lovely line, which was, the point of life, and I always think of sparrows when I think of this, the point of life, is just to live. We go rushing around trying to find some higher purpose, but actually the only point of life is living. And that's what the birds show us. They just get on with things. I hope that's answered your question.
Yeah, so we have, I guess, another question from Susie in the chat. First of all, she says, thank you for this talk. Often when I mention to my non-biology friends that I love listening and watching birds, you do get that weird look. But it's so lovely that someone thinks birds are as healing and magical as I do. Oh, and the question is, if you had to choose one, would it be the skylark?
Oh, you know me too well already. That's always my answer, and it's always the skylark. But I would say followed closely. I mean, I do change my mind every day. When I go to Mull this year, I hope I get up to Mull. I'll hear a curlew and say, no, it's curlew's my favorite. But actually, no, you are right. It is the skylark because it had such meaning for me, but also the song thrush too. I think it's hard to tell those two apart, but I think skylark, people always force me to choose, and I'll say skylark. Well, so you're right.
I guess we're running out of time, but if anybody else has any questions, now is the time. So I guess there aren't any more questions, but thank you so much for giving this talk. And it's been really great to learn about birds and how they can help you heal.
Well,
so, yeah.
It's been, as I said, I'm humbled and honored that you've asked me to speak. And I've really enjoyed talking to you today. And thank you for those lovely questions. And as I say, please, if you do one thing this week or before your exams, try and get out at dusk one night into some empty space and listen to the birds. But it's been a pleasure. So thank you very, very much for having me.
And congratulations on the publication of your book. I hope
thank you.
All goes well.
That's really kind of you. Thanks very much indeed. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, so thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
See you. Bye. Have a lovely week.